Academica Media. From Academica Media Studios in Miami, Florida, it's Big Ideas in Education, a weekly recap of inspiration and innovation in your schools.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Big Ideas in Education. I am your host, Dr. Sarah Boulos V from Somerset Academy Schools, joined, of course, by my co-host, Ryan Kairalla of Doral College. Hello, Ryan.
Hi, Sarah. Good to see you.
Good to see you, too. I know that you are very excited to share something today, something that we have been discussing off the show. So what is it?
Well, we've been discussing this off the show, and I feel like the subject of this story has just overtaken our lives. And I'm excited to bring the story to everybody because it seems like these days everybody has become obsessed with Wordle. The free daily online game where players have 6 attempts to guess a 5-letter word. After each attempt, the player is told if they have a letter correct and in the right position, or if they have a correct letter but in the wrong spot. Have you? I assume you've played this game because you are a human being, right?
It's funny how these things kind of catch on. It's so simple. And I remember asking friends, like, why is everybody talking about this? Is it an app? What is it? What do I do? How do I play?
Yeah, and it's exactly right. It just sort of happened overnight. The game was only created about less than 3 months ago. Now it has millions of players around the world. And earlier this month, the game's creator, Josh Wardle, had sold the title to the New York Times for a 7-figure sum. So not bad for 3 months of work for the guy. And with Wordle Mania taking over the internet, it was only a matter of time before the game found its way into classrooms. And recently, the We Are Teachers blog wrote about different ways that educators have brought the game to their students and finding some great extensions for vocabulary, phonics, and critical thinking along the way. The article talks about one teacher who created a daily, non-online version of Wordle in her classroom. The teacher, Christina Nosik, remarked, quote, "All you need is chart paper, a marker, a ruler, and a laminator." Every teacher needs a good laminator. What was really cool was all of the discussion this sparked around letter combinations, vowel combinations, and why some things work and some things don't. We had such fabulous discussion about how words are made while we played. Other teachers, Sarah, have taken to repurposing Scrabble tiles for their in-classroom Wordle experiences, while others have upped the technology a bit by using the free site mywordle.me to create their own customized Wordle games for their students. Either way, whether we're merely using the game as a fun bell ringer activity or a substantive method to teach phonics and critical thinking, it looks like Wordle and Education have gotten this one right on the very first try.
It is so fun. It's a really fun game. It really is. Yeah. Just as a person, I enjoy playing it. And also, it's a really great way to talk about all the things you just said. As a literacy teacher, I find it to be a challenge to think, okay, well, even things like if there's a C in it, is there a K in it? If there's a H, and if we're talking about the end of words, things that like we teach at a very young level, right? So if you have like double F's at the end of a word or double S's or, I know I'm just geeking out over phonics instruction in my brain right now, but these are the kinds of things I argue with my husband about. Like, no, it can't be. The last letter can't be this because of that, right? So it's such a fun way to get language conversations happening, and you just genuinely are enjoying yourself as you do it. For anybody listening at the time of recording, because I know I was this person, I'm like, all right, everybody's talking about Wordle. Let me go on my phone and find Wordle. It is not an app. It's just a website that you go to. You just go to, what is it, wordle.com or something like that?
I don't even know. Oh, actually, I think they just changed the domain because now it's under the New York Times umbrella. But if you just Google Wordle, it's going to be the first thing that pops up.
Right. At the time of recording. So, of course, because of the New York Times purchase earlier, we're not 100% sure it's going to stay that way when you're listening to this. But it is not an app. That is something that I keep, I was like, but I tried downloading the Wordle app and it's not what everybody's saying. It's not. Don't fall for that pitfall. And it's still free at the time of recording. So that's really cool. Something else that I've seen that people are using is Wordle archives. So they archive the Wordle of the day, right? And so you can go back and play old Wordles that have happened. So that's really fun too. So
That's
this
great.
is just really an exciting... It's just funny how this kind of thing takes over overnight, it feels like. Kind of like what Words with Friends was a big thing, really, not many years ago, I guess.
Absolutely,
now at this point.
And really, it kind of reminds me of being a kid in school, and we would do a word bell ringer, but it was always hangman.
Yeah, I was just going to say that.
Yeah,
it's just hangman, but
this is
a
just
little
2022 hangman. What I've seen a lot of schools doing with Wordle that I think is really neat is a lot of the subject area teachers are using Wordle to expose students to key terms in whatever they're teaching, right? If you're trying to teach about science or history or something, you can make the word relevant to that subject matter, and it can spark conversations around it and get the students excited in some sort of community experience around the game. Either way, I love it. I love it that there are ways to use it in the classroom if you want to go low tech, if you want to go high tech. We got platforms for you either way. And it seems like a really fun daily activity for the students.
It does. And I would be remiss if I didn't say this on the show, but no spoilers, guys. Don't spoil the Wordle.
That's right. That is just, put your little tweet up with like the green boxes and the yellow boxes, but do not give up the Wordle.
Don't give your word up.
That's like the first rule of Wordle.
Yes.
You don't talk about Wordle.
We don't talk about the Wordle.
Sarah, what do you have for us this week?
Well, it doesn't take much looking to find a story about something terrible, if I'm being honest, going on in schools today. I've said it before on this show, but part of what I hope to do is highlight what's going right in education. So it was a particularly interesting moment when I found an article this week about how some of the claims we're seeing about schools in the media today are not actually supported by data. I'll be honest, they are definitely things I've been hearing in the common conversations around schools lately. Without trying to sound too clickbaity, here are 3 myths we're hearing about schools and the pandemic.
3 myths that they don't want you to know.
Yes. The first is the pandemic has prompted a teacher exodus. Yep, right off the bat, I'm talking about retention. And I can hear some of you saying, hey, Sarah, nice try, but you've been talking about the teacher shortage even before the pandemic started. And I think that's part of the point, right? This loss of teachers is definitely making headlines, but the data doesn't necessarily support that it's a result of the pandemic or that it's been prompted by the pandemic. Though there are lots of data suggesting that teachers have been saying they are more likely to leave since the pandemic started, the actual numbers of those teachers leaving are somewhat consistent with long-term trends. Which is not exactly good news, right? Because those trends have been going down for years, but it's also not quite enough to say that the pandemic is a cause of this. So, as an educator, I'm thinking we need to have these conversations long term, right? This is not just like oh no, now this is a brand new problem we didn't have before. No, this is a multifaceted issue that we need to be considering. The second claim is that enrollment declines are going to leave schools in a long-term budget lurch. This one is definitely a more complicated claim, as different schools are funded differently. But the example from the article is talking about how traditional public schools are funded and how that fluctuates due to the economy and policy. I would like to use this claim as not just a straight up, bummer, like, oh, we're going to be in trouble, but rather it's a caution, right? Thinking about how spending is going to be changing in the future. I know a lot of the schools that I've worked with are investing a lot in technology, right? We all had we had an influx of funding for things like technology during the pandemic. So we need to think about how that's going to play out in the coming years. The third claim is that parents are widely dissatisfied with their children's schools. And I think this is a big one. You hear a lot of this all over the internet, right? As a school leader, it may be really easy to hear the voices of those who are unsatisfied. We have, anytime there's any kind of policy change, masks, no masks, there's a lot of really intense conversation on both sides of that. But the data suggests something different. One recent survey asked parents to give their child's school a letter grade for their COVID policies and how they are addressing learning challenges, among other things. In every category, 57 to 71% of parents gave schools an A or a B, with very few parents, usually around 15%, awarding a D or an F. Similarly, a poll of students with disabilities from this fall found that most rated public schools good or excellent in responding to COVID. And I think that that is more realistic when it comes to what's happening in schools, right? We have some very unsatisfied people with very loud voices, but the majority of our families are really happy with what's going on because I think we're all going through this really tough time. And they're recognizing how much the schools are doing to contribute to that community.
Wow. Yeah. And, Data doesn't have a TikTok account, right? Data doesn't have a Facebook account. And so it tends not to be the loudest voice.
It's not always as flashy. Yeah.
That's right. Well, it sort of reminds me of the old adage that my political science professor used to tell me back in the day, way too many years ago, which was people hate Congress but love their congressman. The idea that we all tend to have negative opinions of what we call the education system, the education landscape, because of what we're often exposed to in the media. But when we think about our own schools, largely people are happy with their schools. They know the people there. They know that the humans there are trying hard and doing the best they can under very difficult circumstances. And so we give them the benefit of the doubt because we have that human connection. But I think the further distance we get from the other actors in education, when we think about schools far away in different states, we lose that human connection and we stop giving the system grace. And with respect to your first couple points about some of the myths that you were busting there, the first thing I thought of was how many times on this podcast have we talked about how the pandemic isn't creating problems in education,
Right.
It is exposing problems in
Right.
education. A lot of the things that you were talking about there with respect to teacher retention, those issues existed before. The pandemic just laid them bare. And so once this pandemic gets some semblance of resolved, those structural problems are still going to be there. And it's going to be the responsibility of all of us in the education field and our policymakers to really be committed to addressing them.
When I was thinking through this article, a couple of things came to mind. One being, I'm sure there's like a psychological phenomenon that we could research or talk about with like kind of a mob mentality, right? So everybody's talking about a certain thing. So maybe they'll say like, this thing happened in my kid's school and I wasn't happy about it. And then everybody will be like, oh, I got a story like that. I got a story like that. And they'll pile on to it. And so you could leave that conversation thinking, wow, the schools are really rough. Things are going really badly. But then if we were to go back one-on-one and say, well, how's your kid's school? And you were to think about it, you'd be like, my kid's school's doing pretty well. Because those isolated incidents are not really the end all be all of what's going on. It's just that when we're having that conversation, it's real easy for us as humans to kind of pile on to that. So, it's kind of like talking about a bad haircut and then everybody's like, oh, let me tell you about my bad haircut experience. It's really easy to jump onto that. The other thing that jumps to mind for me is I know this is going to take me down a little bit of a data rabbit hole, but we always, as researchers, we're talking about different kinds of data, right? So we talk about quantitative data and qualitative data. Quantitative, for, just to really simplify, we're talking about numbers, right? So I brought some numbers in this. So we were talking about 71% of parents giving schools an A or a B. That's real quantitative data. Qualitative data has to do with things that are maybe not as easy to capture in numbers, like when we have a story about my kid's teacher left education, right? And talking about that and hearing why that teacher left education. And so I think what's happening is that we're seeing that the quantitative data is not changing, which is kind of what you were saying, right? These problems are not brand new. But what we are hearing is a lot more voices, and we're hearing loud voices. So we knew teacher retention was not fantastic. We knew that. But now we're hearing a lot of stories about teachers leaving and why they're leaving. And the pandemic issues that are being highlighted, again, are not new issues. So I think it's interesting to get that qualitative data and to really hear the voices. So instead of us just saying, okay, well, there's a lot of issues here in teacher retention, we need to ask ourselves, what are these stories telling us and what can we learn from them, right? What can we learn from these stories that's going to help us be better educators, better school leaders, hopefully better policymakers, because unfortunately educators are not the ones making these policies. But the stories have to be heard. So I don't want this to sound like, oh, myth busted, everything's okay. Absolutely not.
Nothing to see here.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
It is really important to take that qualitative data, see how it plays out, and what are we going to do about it?
The optimist in me sees the merit in, because we're now hearing these voices for the first time because of the pandemic and because the pandemic is causing these structural problems that have always existed in education to be laid bare. Now it means that we can have this conversation because more people are talking and more people are listening and being exposed to these problems. And so maybe it creates a scenario where we can have more momentum to get them addressed.
Absolutely. I think that that's really key. And I want to say, it's for a lot of people, it's not the first time they've been saying this and it's not the first time to hear it. But if the public attention is on educators and on these educational issues, let's do something about it, right? So it's really important to get people involved in that conversation. And I'd love to hear what you have to say about this. What would you like to join the conversation? What anecdotal or qualitative data would you like to bring to this conversation? Please use the hashtag BigIdeasInEducation to reach out and let us know. You can reach Ryan at Ryan Kair. You can reach me at Read with Phi, FYE. Thanks so much for being with us. We look forward to the next one. Have a great day.
The views expressed on the preceding program have been those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views of Academica, its clients, staff, affiliates, or advertisers.